The sun was just beginning to dip beneath the horizon, casting long shadows over the small town of Eldermire. A hush settled over the cobbled streets as golden light painted the rooftops, and the faint scent of rain hung in the air. It was the kind of evening that promised change, though no one yet knew how profound that change would be. The heart of Eldermire beat in its market square, where by day merchants hawked their wares, and children darted between stalls, laughing. But now, as twilight fell, the square stood empty, except for a lone figure leaning against the ancient stone fountain at its center. Lillian Hawthorne tugged her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her dark eyes scanning the darkening alleyways. She was waiting. For what or whom, even she wasn't entirely sure. A whispered note had arrived that morning, slipped beneath the door of her modest bookshop. Midnight. The square. Come alone. No name, no explanation, just those 6 words. Lillian had considered ignoring it. Life in Eldermire was simple, and she preferred it that way. The days in her shop, nestled among stories and pages yellowed with age, were predictable and safe. Yet something in the scrawled handwriting had tugged at her curiosity, and so she waited. As the first stars pierced the evening sky, footsteps echoed from the northern archway. Lillian straightened, pushing strands of her chestnut hair behind her ear, ready to face whoever had summoned her. A man emerged, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. He walked with purpose, his boots clicking softly against the stone. When he reached the fountain, he stopped but did not speak immediately. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. "You're early," he finally said, his voice low and rough. "I didn't realize midnight was a strict requirement," Lillian replied, keeping her tone light but wary. The man lifted his head, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds. There was a hard edge to his gaze, but something about him seemed familiar. Lillian's brow furrowed. "Do I know you?" she asked. "You did once," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But it's been a long time," Lillian. Recognition sparked. "Nathaniel?" He gave a slow nod. Nathaniel Grayson. The boy who had left Eldermire nearly 10 years ago, vanishing without a trace. The last time she had seen him, they had been just teenagers, sitting beneath the willow tree by the river, sharing secrets as if the world outside their small town didn't exist. "I thought you were dead," she whispered, unable to mask the tremor in her voice. "Not dead, just elsewhere," Nathaniel replied, his gaze shifting away as if recalling memories he would rather forget. Before Lillian could press him further, he took a step closer. "I need your help." "With what?" Lillian asked, her eyes narrowing with cautious interest. Nathaniel hesitated, glancing around the square as if ensuring they were alone. "Not here. Meet me by the old windmill tomorrow night. I'll explain everything." And just like that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Lillian alone beneath the starlit sky. Questions swirling like autumn leaves. The following day passed in a blur. Lillian could barely focus on the customers drifting in and out of her shop. Her mind raced with speculation. What had driven Nathaniel away all those years ago? Why had he returned now, shrouded in secrecy? When night fell, Lillian made her way to the windmill on the outskirts of town. The structure stood tall against the indigo sky, its wooden blades creaking softly in the breeze. Nathaniel was already there, waiting beside a lantern that cast flickering light across his face. "You came," he said softly. "I want answers," Lillian replied firmly, crossing her arms. Nathaniel's expression grew somber. "There's something I need to show." He led her to the edge of the forest, where the trees loomed like silent sentinels. As they walked, Nathaniel spoke in hushed tones, recounting tales of ancient artifacts, hidden powers, and a danger that had been dormant for centuries but now threatened to awake. "I left to protect Eldermire," Nathaniel explained, "but I failed. The danger is here now, closer than ever." Lillian listened intently, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always thought of Eldermire as peaceful, untouched by the dark forces that existed in story. But Nathaniel's return shattered that illusion. "What can I do?" she asked. Nathaniel met her gaze, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "I can't do this alone. I need someone I can trust." Lillian nodded slowly. "Then let's face this together." And so, Beneath the moonlit canopy of trees, an alliance was forged, bound by friendship, mystery, and the promise of a battle that would shape the future of Eldermire. The labyrinth's test. The figure's form shimmered and blurred, as if it were more shadow than substance. Its presence was overwhelming, its very essence pressing down on Lillian and Nathaniel like a heavy fog. The cold, sharp air seemed to tighten around them, the darkness now thick with an oppressive energy. Lillian's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let fear overtake her. Nathaniel stepped forward, his jaw clenched, and his eyes never leaving the cloaked figure. "We don't have time for riddles. Eldermire is in danger, and the Heartstone is the only way to stop it." The shadowed figure tilted its head, its eyes gleaming like pale moons in the blackness. "You think the Heartstone will save you? It is a key to power, yes, but also to destruction. To wield it requires more than mere courage. You must prove your worth, your understanding of the forces you seek to control." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and the labyrinth seemed to hum in response, as if it were alive, waiting. The ground beneath their feet trembled lightly, and Lillian felt an unspoken weight in the air, as though the very walls of the labyrinth were watching. Nathaniel, undeterred, glanced at Lillian. There was an urgency in his eyes. This was their only chance. "What do we have to do?" he asked, his voice sharp but steady. The figure raised its hand, and suddenly, the stone floor beneath their feet shifted. The ground parted like a curtain, revealing a dark chasm that seemed to stretch into an endless abyss. The light from their lantern flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls as a low, distant roar echoed from below. Lillian took a step back, instinctively gripping Nathaniel's arm. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A test," Nathaniel replied grimly. "It's always been a test." The figure's voice echoed through the chamber, its words as cold as the air around them. The labyrinth is not just a place of physical trials. It challenges the heart, the mind, and the soul. To claim the Heartstone, you must face your deepest fears, confront the truth you are unwilling to see. A wave of dread washed over Lillian. This was no ordinary trial, was something far more personal, something that would push them to the edge of their own beings. The cloaked figure extended its hand, and the darkness within the chasm seemed to ripple, revealing a series of narrow ledges leading down into the abyss. "You must descend. One must go alone." Nathaniel immediately moved forward. "I'll go," he said firmly. "I've already faced what's in there." Lillian grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what's down there. We do this together." The figure's voice softened, almost a whisper now. "You both must face the labyrinth separately. The way is not the same for each of you." Nathaniel's eyes were hard, his resolve unyielding. "We can't afford to waste time," he muttered. Lillian hesitated, but there was no denying the truth of the figure's words. She didn't fully understand what they were about to face, but she knew one thing for certain: if they didn't trust in each other now, the darkness would overtake them. "We'll do it," she said, swallowing her fear. "But we'll meet again, and we'll face this together." Nathaniel gave her a fleeting glance. His lips pressed into a tight line. He nodded. With one last look, Lillian watched Nathaniel step onto the ledges, disappearing into the shadows of the chasm below. She stood still, her breath shaky, the cold around her growing heavier as the silence stretched. The figure's glowing eyes never left her. The ground trembled again, but this time it was different. The air turned oppressive, suffocating, as the labyrinth responded to Lillian's presence. The walls seemed to close in, and she felt a familiar tug deep within her chest, a sensation she had tried so hard to ignore for years. The darkness around her pulsed, and with it, memories she thought long buried came rushing to the surface. She found herself standing in her childhood home, the smell of fresh bread and her mother's lavender perfume filling the air. Her father's booming laugh echoed through the halls, a sound that always made her feel safe. But as she moved through the house, Something felt wrong. The familiar walls began to shift, and with each step, the warmth of her home seemed to fade. The edges of the room darkened, and shadows twisted where light should have been. The walls, once so sturdy, began to crumble, turning to dust beneath her feet. Lillian's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She didn't understand. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. She forced herself to move, to fight against the pull of the illusion. But as she walked deeper into the now ruined home, she saw her mother standing at the end of the hall, her eyes empty, hollow. Her face was pale, and her lips barely moved when she spoke. "You left us, Lillian," she whispered, her voice distant. "You always leave." Lillian froze, her breath caught in her throat. The words sliced through her like a blade. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I didn't leave. You left," her mother repeated, her voice growing louder, more insistent, more accusatory. "You abandoned us. You didn't stay." The illusion cracked around Lillian, and the walls seemed to close in on her. The darkness was suffocating, pressing against her chest, suffocating her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't escape. A surge of desperation filled her, and with it, a fiery determination. "I didn't leave," she whispered fiercely, her hands clenched into fists. "I stayed. I've always stayed." The shadows writhed, and the illusion began to unravel, fading away into nothingness. But a part of Lillian's heart remained heavy, burdened by the fear that had taken root long ago, fear that she was always destined to leave, to fail the ones she loved. The labyrinth had shown her her greatest fear, abandonment. But she had faced it, and in doing so, she reclaimed her strength. She stepped forward, her resolve solidifying. "I'll never abandon them again." The ground beneath her feet rumbled, and the chasm began to shift. A new passage opened before her own that led deeper into the heart of the labyrinth, toward the Heartstone. She had passed the test, but the battle was far from over. The labyrinth had shown her the darkness inside herself, and she knew that if she wanted to save Eldermire, she would have to face whatever awaited her at the end of this trial, and she wasn't alone. Nathaniel was somewhere ahead, ready to fight by her side. With newfound strength, she took a deep breath and began her descent. The real test was yet to come. The Heartstone's call, the descent into the labyrinth's depths, felt endless. The walls pressed closer with every step, the light from Lillian's lantern flickering and casting ominous shadows on the stone corridors. She knew she was drawing closer to the Heartstone, but with each step, the weight of what lay ahead grew heavier. The labyrinth had tested her heart, forcing her to confront her deepest fears, the memories of abandonment that had always haunted her. But now, as the air thickened with an otherworldly presence, Lillian could sense the true nature of the trial was about to begin. The Heartstone was not just a key to power, it was a force that could either save or destroy Eldermire, depending on who wielded it. As she moved deeper, the silence became suffocating. The only sound her own breath and the soft creak of her boots against the cold stone floor. The deeper she went, the more she felt a pull, a whisper in the back of her mind, like a voice calling to her from far away. It was then that she saw it. In the distance, the Heartstone rested upon a stone pedestal, bathed in an ethereal, pulsing light. It stood alone in the center of a vast chamber, its jagged form shimmering with an inner fire. The glow was mesmerizing, as if the stone itself were alive, its power surging with every heartbeat. Lillian's hand instinctively reached for it, but a shadowed figure stepped out from the darkness, blocking her path. It was Nathaniel. "Lillian," he said softly, his voice hoarse. His eyes were filled with an emotion she couldn't place. He had changed since their journey began, more hardened, more distant. The boy she once knew seemed a distant memory, replaced by someone burdened by a heavy secret. "You mustn't take it." Lillian's heart skipped a beat. "Nathaniel, what are you talking about? This is the only way to stop the darkness. We can't leave it here." He took a step forward, his expression pained. "It's not what you think. The Heartstoneite's power, it can't be controlled. If we take it, we risk everything. We risk ourselves and the entire world." The words struck her like a blow. She had believed they were here to save Eldermire, to protect it from whatever ancient evil was stirring in the shadows. But now, doubt crept in. "You've changed," Lillian whispered. "When you left, you told me you were protecting Eldermire. You said this was the only way. But now you're telling me to leave it behind?" Nathaniel's eyes darkened, and he turned away slightly, as though he couldn't face her. "I left to protect you all from myself." Lillian's confusion deepened. "What do you mean?" He inhaled sharply, his voice trembling as he spoke. "The Heartstone was never meant to be wielded by anyone. It's too powerful, too dangerous. When I left Eldermire all those years ago, I sought to learn more about it. The Heartstone's origin, its power. It was created long ago to seal away a force older than time. A force that, if released, would consume everything." Lillian's stomach churned. "What force? What are you talking about?" Nathaniel's eyes met hers, his gaze filled with sorrow and regret. "The Heartstone was never meant to be wielded. It's the key to a door that should remain shut. The truth is, I didn't just leave Eldermire to protect it. I left because I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I stayed, and that I might be the one to open that door. I came back because I knew the time was coming." A cold shiver ran down Lillian's spine. You've known this all along?" Nathaniel nodded, his face hardening with the weight of his words. "I tried to stop it. I tried to prevent it from ever reaching this point. But now that we're here, I realize that I'm not strong enough to stop it. Only someone with the purest heart can close that door, and that's not me." "It's you, Lillian." Lillian felt a lump rise in her throat. "You're saying I'm the one who has to stop this? But how? I don't know how to wield that kind of power. I've never—" "You already have," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "You've always had it inside of you. It's why the Heartstone called to you, why you were chosen. You've always believed in the good in people, in Eldermire. That's what makes you pure of heart. You are the only one who can prevent the Heartstone from unleashing the darkness within." Lillian took a step back, her mind racing. She couldn't understand it, couldn't fully grasp the enormity of what he was saying. The weight of the Heartstone's power seemed to press down on her like an unbearable burden. The shadows in the chamber seemed to grow darker, the air growing thick with an unsettling presence. It was then that Lillian understood. They were not just fighting for Eldermire. They were fighting for the very fabric of reality itself. If they failed here, the world as they knew it would cease to exist. "I don't know if I can do this," Lillian whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm just a bookseller, Nathaniel. I'm not a hero." Nathaniel stepped closer, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "You don't have to be a hero. You just have to believe in what you're fighting for. You've always had the strength within you. You've just had to learn to trust it." The Heartstone pulsed in the distance, its glow growing brighter, as if it were urging her forward, calling to her in a way that was impossible to resist. Lillian stood at the precipice of destiny. She had always thought that her life in Eldermire was simple and peaceful, that the world outside her small bookshop didn't need her. But now, she understood that everything had led to this moment. She had been prepared for this, without even knowing it. With a deep breath, Lillian stepped forward, her hand reaching out toward the Heartstone. As her fingers brushed the stone's jagged surface, a surge of energy exploded through her, flooding her senses with ancient knowledge, power, and a sense of profound connection to the world around her. The Heartstone glowed brighter, its pulse synchronizing with her heartbeat. The power within her surged, filling her with a deep sense of purpose. The chamber trembled, and Lillian felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The door was open now, and only she could close it. As the stone's light reached its peak, Nathaniel stepped back, watching with a mixture of awe and fear. The final test had begun, and with the power of the Heartstone in her hands, Lillian knew that the fate of Eldermire and perhaps the entire world rested on her ability to close the door and keep the darkness at bay. But she wasn't alone. With Nathaniel at her side, and the strength of the Heartstone within her, Lillian Hawthorne was ready to face whatever came next. And the battle for Elder Myrand for the future had only just begun.